Welcome to this episode of the Make Disciples podcast. My name is Dan Rober, and joining me in the podcast studio today is Bob Burton. Good to have you here, Bob.
Thank you.
Yeah. Now, Bob, am I right in saying that you are the longest serving staff member at Wildwood right now?
Gosh, I think I am.
Okay.
And funny thing about that, when I came on staff in January of 2006,
Okay.
I told Pastor Bob, I'll come on staff, but I'm only going to be here for 3 years.
And then it just sucks you in, and you're just here forever.
So that's only 19 years.
Okay. 3 years, 19 years. It's about the same thing. Yeah. Well, great. Well, for those who don't know you, why don't you introduce yourself and talk about what your primary job here is at Wildwood?
Okay. Well, back in 2006, I came on as basically like an executive director, and I did finances, help oversee staff, so a little bit of everything. Then in 2016, when Pastor David came, I moved to just doing the finance director of the church. But then we were building the community center, the Northside Community Center, and so I oversaw that construction. And then once it was complete, I'm now the director out there. So I'm half the time at Wildwood, and half my time is spent, concerned with the community center.
Which honestly is more than a full-time job, right? It keeps you busy.
It's only 6.5 days a week.
That certainly fills you up, and we're thankful for all the work that you do, and exciting to see the growth and development at the community center as well. But the primary thing that we're doing here is we're talking about stories. And so we all have a story, and that's what brings us together as a church. So why don't you spend a little time telling us a little bit about your own faith story? What led you to Christ?
Well, I grew up in a Christian family, and Sunday mornings we were in church, Sunday nights we were in church, Wednesday nights we were in church. And this is in Jacksonville. Back then I thought it was a big church. It was 150 to 200 people, but now that's probably a fairly small church. And it's like I can't remember not believing. And I think we had baptism last Sunday with a little child, and just hearing them talk about the church family coming around the children, and it's a blessing to not remember that you've never believed.
Yeah.
There are people that have the story that, gosh, I was in college and I fell down on my knees in a ball field and I, cried out to the Lord. I never had that experience. I just always believed. However, in the church we were at, it was a Baptist church, and so there was an invitation hymn at the end of every service. And I was 8 years old, remember that? And I just felt, I knew I had to one day go stand before the church and publicly confess that Jesus is my Lord.
Yeah.
You just can't know it, but not stand up and say it. And I remember one Sunday, my next door neighbor, a young girl my same age, she went down, and I felt I was feeling the need. I need to go down, but I said, no, I don't want anybody to think that I went down because my best friend went down. I needed to be able to do it myself, and just make no doubt that it's my decision. And so the very next Sunday, I made sure I was the first one to step out and go down and publicly confess to the congregation that, Jesus is my Lord, and he's the one saving me, and it's not myself.
Yeah. I love that, because you have both this date and time, which a lot of people really like, but it's also about this legacy of faith that's passed on from generations to generation. And that's what all of us as parents want for our kids as well, so that they could say that there's never a time where they felt like they were not in the care of God and not believing God. And so that's our prayer for all of our kids. So that's an encouragement for a faith that's passed down through the generations. Well, that's what brought you to Jesus. Let's talk a little bit about what brought you to Wildwood. So how did you come on staff back in 2006?
Okay. Well, what brought me to Wildwood was in 1994. And my wife, Cynthia, and I had been at another church in town for years. And we had our pastor retire, and they brought in a new pastor. And one Sunday after church, I looked at Cynthia, my wife, and said, I think he forgot to use the Bible today. It was a pastor that had been a professor at a seminary, and the Bible wasn't coming alive. I mean, it was like he had 3 points for sure, And so we said, we need to look around. And so we started visiting other churches, and we thought we found a church that we liked. We went there for about 2 or 3 months, and we said no. And then we heard about Wildwood, and we went and visited Wildwood one Sunday, and we looked at one another and said, this is the place. Back then, Pastor Bob was the assistant pastor, and Mike Kanjan was the senior pastor.
Yeah.
And so we joined while they were off of Meridian at a little church in the woods. And it almost seems like the very next Sunday or 2 Sundays after that, we moved to Waccamaw Plaza. So that was really my first experience with Wildwood. Was we were next to Chuck E. Cheese.
Yeah.
And so we just enjoyed the community of Wildwood. Matter of fact, if I had to say, in addition to good teaching, it's the community that Wildwood has.
Yeah.
And gosh, trying to think of what year it was. 20 years ago, we started a young couple small group with young children.
Yeah.
And we still do that. And now many of those kids are in college or out of college, but yet that's our church family.
Yeah.
I'll call it the more intimate church family. You have the church, the big C church across the world, and then you have Wildwood. But then I really believe we need that smaller community that you can share life with.
Yeah, that's why community groups are so important, because it's hard to have a community of the 500-600 people that show up in a typical Sunday morning here.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. Yeah. So what brought you on staff then? That's what got you to Wildwood, but what brought you on staff?
Well, back in mid-90s, or say 96, while we're still at Waccamaw Plaza, the treasurer of the church had eye surgery, and they looked around and said, does anybody know accounting? And I did. And so I said, well, I'll volunteer and do that. So I started doing the church books, and then 10 years later, I'm still doing the church books as a volunteer, and Wildwood is growing.
Yeah.
And so it was taking on more and more time. And I had been with a computer company for 32 years. And in 2005, I said, well, I'm going to retire, from that. And that's when Pastor Bob said, oh, you're retiring. Can you help us out? So I said, sure, but I'll do it for 3 years. And so that's when I came on. I still, did the books, but then my role expanded. And then I got a part-time person working for me that did most of the checks and things like that. And then I would just really do the reporting and check signing and things like that.
Sure.
And so I was doing that with some help then, which was great. I'll never want to go back and reconcile the church's bank statement. Thank goodness I have somebody that does that.
Absolutely. So you've seen Wildwood for over 30 years now, but 19 years on staff. Just one more question.
Okay.
What is your hope for Wildwood? What would you like Wildwood to be in the upcoming years?
I just want to see Wildwood be outward focused on the people that aren't in church.
Yeah.
Most churches grow by somebody moving into town or somebody coming from one church to another church. And I've seen that happen here. I've seen people that have been at Wildwood and then they're now at another church, and 6 years later they're back at Wildwood, and you're not sure the reasons why, but so to me, that's more inward focus of the big C church.
Yeah.
One believer moving from one place to the other. And I really just want to see Wildwood focused on thinking about who is not here that should be here. There's people at your work, there's your neighbors, there's, people that you just bump into. And that's one thing I love about the community center. I'm meeting people I never would have met.
Yes.
And so, and it's a safe place. By safe, I mean, I could go hang out at a public park somewhere. People probably wonder why I'm hanging out there, but out at the center is when I'm meeting people. It's I'm a host.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, thank you so much for sharing your story, Bob. It's great to hear everything that God has used you over these many years at Wildwood. And we'd love to hear your stories as well. They encourage our congregation, and we'd love to hear more about how God has moved in your life through your salvation, or maybe something even more recently than that. You can go to wildwoodtlh.com/stories, and there's a simple form there that you can fill out to encourage us as a staff and the congregation as well. And I hope you'll join us again for the next episode of the Make Disciples podcast.